Inner Voice, a heartfelt chat with Dr. Foojan.
Introducing a powerful new update from the Foojan app. Now with flexible subscription plans to fit your journey monthly, quarterly, or yearly. Our new AI-driven onboarding customizes your path to feeling better, faster, and enjoy a refreshed experience with stunning 3D interactive videos. Update now. Empower your inner voice with Foojan. Download today.
Welcome to the Inner Voice, a heartfelt chat podcast. I'm Dr. Foojan Zeine. I'm a psychotherapist, an author, and the creator of the Awareness Integration Theory. I'm thrilled to have you join me today for what I promise you to be an amazing discussion. Today, I speak with John Wang. He is the author of Big Asian Energy, an executive coach, and a sought-after speaker helping Asian professionals break through leadership barriers. With over 15 years of experience, he has coached clients from Google, Apple, Amazon, and Goldman Sachs, empowering them to step into their leadership with confidence. His insight on confidence, assertiveness, and breaking limiting patterns have amazed over 25 million views on social media, where he has built a global audience of 240,000 followers. He does host the Big Asian Energy podcast, which is on Apple and other places where you could find him. John features top Asian American therapists, leaders, and change makers, sharing real conversations about breaking barriers and defining success. He's a TEDx speaker and a global traveler who has visited 51 countries. And he combines the cultural insight, humor, and science-backed strategies to help professionals overcome imposter syndrome and self-censorship. His mission is to help Asian Americans own their voice, lead with confidence, and claim their space in every room they walk into. What we talked about and what I got from his book is not just for Asians. It's for any of the cultures who have migrated, for immigrants, for first generation, sometimes even second generation, and even for people who are not immigrants and are, in relation to immigrants, whether they are at work or family settings or friendships. It really talks about what happens in the stereotype and conversations that we might have internally, and kind of opening some of those internal conversations and share in how to create this type of integration, which works for everyone, as we undoubtedly live in communities that are very much intermixed culturally, and there's a beauty in this. But within that beauty, it's the uniqueness of each one of us. So I really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm positive that you will also do. Now, be sure to subscribe to my podcast on my YouTube channel and connect with me through my website, foojanzeine.com. Please go to Foojan app. We go through 31 areas of your life to go guided journaling and guided meditations, and really create an improvement in your life. And we also have a chatbot called Mira, which answers your questions from the Awareness Integration Theory. So it's waiting for you. Go hop on and get the Foojan app. Connect with me through my social media. I truly love to hear from you. Now, without further ado, here's John Wang.
Listen up if you want to promote your personal growth and self-awareness. I found the Foojan app last month, and I have been absolutely loving it. I personally have never learned guided meditation, but thanks to this app, I now have learned incredible tools for my own stress relief and emotional self-awareness. Not to mention, there are self-evaluation tools and professional coaching available to utilize however your journey to self-discovery takes you. Join Foojan today and redefine your life one step at a time.
Intentional Parenting, a practical guide to awareness integration theory, written by Dr. Jafari, Dr. Foojan Zeine, and Dr. Manoukian, 3 experts in human development,
is your step-by-step guide to raising a healthy child prepared for a culturally integrated world. You're supported in parenting infants to adolescents using the latest evidence-based scientific research on parenting. Order your copy on Amazon now.
I am so excited to have you, Mr. John Wang, with us, everybody.
I'm so excited to be here. This is a message, and I feel like such a great fit because I love your show and the ideas that you spread. Also, just the authenticity that you speak with. So it is a pleasure to be here, truly.
Thank you so much. So you have written Big Asian Energy book. So I just want to know, what is a big Asian energy? Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there is a stereotype that a lot of people who look like me, who are Asian Americans, who grew up in the West, have at some point faced, which is this idea that Asians are maybe a little more quiet. We're seen as hardworking, we're seen as, good at math, good at these technical things, but we're often said and perceived to not be the most outgoing, assertive leaders. And these are stereotypes that have been studied. And so it's not just like we're just kind of talking about it from just personal experience. But growing up in North America, this was always something I've always wondered about. Because when I look at myself, I'm like, yes, I consider myself to be a recovering, quiet, socially awkward person. That's just my own personal story. But I definitely have seen so many people around me who are actually very outgoing, very spirited, and I would say charismatic. So I started diving deeper into what the reasoning behind this idea came from, this idea that Asians are quiet came from. And that led truly into, I would say, one of the most fascinating explorations that took about 3-4 years of research and bringing in psychologists and experts to talk about before we started really looking at the core of it. But that was a long ramble to start up. Big Asian Energy is, simply put, the authentic and full self-expression of who we are, breaking through all of the social conditioning, the familial or cultural conditioning we may have been brought up with that have taught us to hide parts of ourselves.
And what do you think has supported the concept of attempting to hide? Has it been more the expectation, or is a very strong years and years and years, hundreds and thousands of years of a particular culture that has held itself? And, when we're talking about Asian culture, also, I hope that everybody knows we're not clumping them together. We have a lot
of... we're not a monolith and all that.
Many, many different countries. But each one of those countries still kind of holds many years of really societal culture. So it's very different than culture, which is more individualistic. Those cultures are a little bit more a societal construct. And am I accurate in thinking that in order to fit into the society, you might have to cover different parts of you that at that time might not fit, and therefore kind of push them aside, kind of put them in different closets, and then having the courage to bring them out and still own and enjoy and love the societal concept and with high respect, but still having the respect of those parts of you to also coexist with those?
That was an excellent summation of what I think the key things that does show up, which is that there is a cultural difference, and you named it. In the Western societal structure, oftentimes, we're talking about countries like the US, Canada, areas of Western Europe, where countries are usually more individualistic. And this differs from oftentimes East and often South Asian countries that are more collectivistic. So a collectivist society is one that tends to prioritize things like the group. So we're taught more to focus on harmony. We're taught more to focus on humility and humbleness of not speaking up. And oftentimes these comes in social rules. So for example, growing up, I was always taught that, especially when I'm talking to elders or being around other people, it's important not to share too much, to make sure that people who are older than you, who have more authority, get that stage first. And that was seen as a politeness. Whereas when I came to North America, it was such a vastly different world, especially in the workplace, because we're often suddenly taught to be like, oh, no, you got to speak up. Starting from school, you're taught, oh, you got to raise your hand more. Why are you so quiet? You got to raise your hand. You got to make sure that you're asking questions, you're telling people how you're feeling. And that part in particular, talking about how you're feeling, is something that is entirely not focused on in a collectivist culture. We don't talk about our feelings. It's almost a little rude to be talking about our feelings all the time and talking about what you're thinking all the time. We're taught that no, your work is seen through how hard you work. And if somebody recognizes your work, that's their job to come and give you that spotlight, not for you to speak up for yourself. So there are all these elements of conflicts that we've learned, and sometimes it could be a little challenging to navigate.
Yes. Now, there are cultural stereotypes that you were talking about. One of them is about, not necessarily showing emotion. I've worked with many Asians as my clients, and I do get that obviously when they feel safe and they're within their intimate conversations or their family, they do talk about and they share all of their emotions. But I'm also sensing that it's not even in the language as much, because there has to be a sharing which comes in the language. And I say this because one of the ways that I learned how to do therapy to get people to really share about their emotions, in English language, you could just share and say, I'm sad. And it says a lot, right? So, we were also experimenting with how do you take on some of the words that have emotional charges in them, and then you take, you feedback it with your body, and then the other person would kind of subconsciously connect to their emotion and go in it. This really worked with all the English-speaking people. And then, I'm originally from Iran, so I started doing this with the Iranian population. The method wasn't working because in Farsi language, the words are not necessarily stated as emotional words. They're stated more like a poetic, that you're describing something. So it was interesting that even sharing emotion took its own way of, because of the culture and language. So I wonder, is that part of also the language, that it might not necessarily hold on to sharing emotion in that way? So you have to, even if you were going to share your emotion, you will have to do it in a particular way.
Yeah. And the languaging of how to, when can we talk about our emotions? How can we talk our emotions? And oftentimes, what kind of emotions can we even talk about? These are all part, I think, of the complications. Like personally growing up, my parents, they didn't talk about emotions. They just expressed it. And what that means is that they don't use words like, oh, I love you, or like, I'm proud of you as often, but they will show it through action. And sometimes that meant that growing up, I always like to say, is like the language that we were spoken to as a child is the language that we learn to speak to ourselves as when we're growing up, right? It's, if you grow up speaking Mandarin, then you now know how to speak Mandarin. If you grow up speaking English, then you now know how to speak English. If you grew up learning how to talk about your feelings, then you know how to talk about your feelings. So for me, I never got that. And it took a long time to even identify that, oh, I'm experiencing these feelings at a deeper level, let alone to express it, and let alone knowing where to do so. And this also has another cultural effect that I think a lot of us who are from that culture probably instinctively know, which is the understanding of face.
Yes.
So face is basically the outside persona of how we present ourselves. And this is a big part of our cultural interactions. And it even comes down to things like, are we allowed to say no to people when they're making requests? Or, if somebody offers us something, can we say yes to that? All of that plays into what is called high context communication. And high context communication means that you leave a lot unsaid to just be read by the room. So if you're feeling angry, you don't say, I'm feeling angry. You say, there's probably a better way for you to have handled that. And I, let's ponder on that a little bit rather than just saying, I'm disappointed. So there's a lot of navigation around how do we know what is being said and what is actually being meant.
And direct conversation sometimes even appears inappropriate and rude.
Oh, yeah.
Direct confrontation, it has, I've experienced that with as I was working with many of the clients where, like in the Western world, as a therapist, we're also teaching how to communicate. And many times if I had suggested just straight communication, and to them, it would be like, I can't do that because it's not about me not having the ability to say those sentences. The point is that the way that it's going to be received, the way it's going to be landing on the other person, they won't take it as an authentic conversation. They will take it as I'm being rude and offensive to them. So you can see where all of these side conversations are getting created. And I bet that this also happens a lot in business interactions, transactions, in employee, and management interaction and transaction, where we're coming from two different cultures, or in the United States or Canada, we're actually coming from a melting pot of cultures that are all coming together in a company, and it becomes a lot of misinterpretation, let's say, and miscommunication based on all of these cultural values that show up with us, and this is what we've learned.
Yeah. And it could be so tough, right? You gave a great example, which is, if we're giving direct feedback in a low context society like the US, it's pretty accepted. You could go to somebody and say, hey, there's something on. You might be able to be polite about it. You might pull them to the side and you could give them direct feedback. And it's generally accepted with an understanding. Whereas if you go to, let's say, Japan, a friend of mine, I went to Japan and I visited, with a friend there, and he was explaining to me that in Japan, we don't like to say no. Like even the word outright no, we try to avoid it because it's very rude to tell somebody direct no. So we find ways to navigate around it. And you can imagine in a workplace how many times that will result in miscommunication. Just to give you an example. So I was giving a presentation actually about communication with a co-facilitator. And the night before we met, we went out for dinner. He was also Asian. And, the two of us, we went for dinner and then we went for karaoke after because we were just such stereotypes sometimes. And he was one of the most charming, outgoing, charismatic people ever. I loved him. He was just so outspoken. He was talking to the chefs at the restaurant. He was just, nothing was held back. And then the next day we went and we did the workshop together. And I was the person I was leading the workshop, and he was also there, and we were co-leading and co-facilitating. And for the first hour or so, he didn't say anything. And I was like, oh man, like, why didn't he say anything? He's got so many great ideas yesterday where I was waiting for him to kind of jump in, and I kept, giving him glances and being like, waiting for him to be like, okay, I'll jump in. I have this to add. And literally, I think it wasn't until the almost like end of the first day that I finally went and I said, okay, well, I went and asked him. I was like, we haven't heard much from you. Maybe you could come out and like just lead the last part. And then he jumped in and he was amazing. He like charmed the room. He immediately jumped in. He was sharing his stuff and everyone loved him. And at the end, I was just kind of asked him, I was like, hey, why didn't you speak up earlier, throughout the whole day? And he said, well, I was waiting for you to give me the signal. And to him, that permission to say, okay, now I'm officially handing that spot to you is really important, because to him, jumping in and speaking up and interrupting would have been very rude. So it's these kind of little interactions that we don't think about as being how direct are we allowed to be, how assertive are we allowed to be, that creates these cultural conflicts.
So everyone, please get this book, Big Eight. And Unapologetic Guide for Breaking Barriers to Leadership and Success by John Wang. John, there's also another, as you talked about, stereotype, but I think this is part of, again, the concept of the culture, which is a high achiever concept. The part that you said, the family really installs moving forward, being active, living your excellence, and the concept of like the helicopter motherly, which the parents constantly looking at you, making sure that you do your best, and they'll give you everything, they'll take care of you, do that because you're just supposed to be, studying and getting better and going to the next level and to the next level. And that kind of gets installed. Although obviously there's amazing results on one side, but there's also this other part that you're always not listening to yourself and you're under this level of anxiety and stress to do best, better, creating a perfect model. And if you don't, then obviously there's a lot of depression, anxiety. And at one point we had a high level of suicide from Asian students who were at Ivy League colleges where were kind of like feeling forced to be there. And then they just couldn't handle, especially like the first year or so where they left their family, they completely went to a new place, and they had such a high expectation of themselves that if they even, had less than the high A grade, it's going to be a disgrace. So having the ability to face their family and, their parents and the bigger extended family with that kind of a failure, it was just unacceptable. So what are your thoughts about this kind of pressure, and how do we handle that type of a pressure where we could, take care of ourselves, be who we are, and then yet respect what our family and society is also expecting of us?
This is a really big piece. I grew up with traditional Asian parents. I had a conversation about this when I was putting out the book, and my mom was like, "Don't call me a tiger mom." I'm like, but there is this concept of tiger parenting, which is very common and very well known in Asian cultures. And I want to explain it a little bit because there's this expectation that it's all about like this stereotype of like, disciplinarian dad who's like, oh, you got to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer. And don't get me wrong, I definitely got that talk when I was growing up. But I think that there's a deeper layer to it, not just the kind of high pressure, high societal expectation of go in and succeed. And it has to do with, again, the idea of family and culture. See, there's a big part of our society that's really focused on sacrifice. And if you think about it, I grew up with parents who are immigrants, and they immigrated to North America to give me and my siblings a better chance of success. So you see that, okay, my parents are sacrificing, they're doing their duty. Now it's my turn to do my duty because we're all here to do what's right for the family. But that pressure could be so tough to handle. I mean, I went through burnout personally. There was a time where I worked so hard because my belief was if I'm not working, then I'm not worthy of anything, essentially, which is such a hard thing to hold on to. Now, even saying that, I could feel it in my body of like, oof. But especially at the time, there was this deeper belief that if I'm not working hard enough, then I'm not doing the service that I should be for my family, for my culture, for my ancestors even. And when I was growing up in that environment, and this is something that I've heard a lot of people kind of give me feedback on, was that they also felt the same thing, was there's always this culture of comparison. So I would come back and I would bring back, a grade of like, oh, I got like, a 92% on a math test, which for me, breaking all the stereotypes, I was terrible at math. Like that was something I was really proud of. And I brought it home and I gave it to my mom, and my mom looked at it and was like, okay, but what happened to the other 8%? And that was this immediate kind of, invalidation in some ways, but also this kind of comparison because it's like, well, the other kids are doing better. Your cousin got into the school and, so and so's family's kid, recently got this internship or and there's this constant feeling and pressure of comparison. Even if the parents aren't the ones who are actively giving that to you, you still felt it. So for a number of years, I was working with students because I have an academy. It's called Mastery Academy. We do education and consulting, and so a lot of the people who came to us were students, and they come from families whose parents are like, we really want our kids to get into those Ivy League schools, Harvard, MIT, Stanford. So I got to work with them. And the main goal was to help them work on their, ability to communicate and their mindset so that they could do this. But over the years, I can't tell you how many students I've met who basically were on the edge or already going through burnout because they didn't understand why they were doing it beyond I just should. And there's this cultural script of, well, you go to school, you do really well, you get into a top school, a top university, you come out, you get into a top workplace, like you go to, Microsoft or a major consulting firm or whatever it is, and then you're done. And then like, that's it. You've accomplished everything and now go and have kids, right? Like that, go get married and have kids. So like, there's this very scripted expectation, but when you're actually going through it, it starts to drain you to the point that you're kind of going, why? Why am I doing this? And you lose motivation, but you can't because the pressure is still there. And that's personally what I went through. And again, I've seen it again, again, again. We see burnout, we see imposter syndrome, we see this sense of like, no matter what I'm doing, it's not enough. I'll never be enough. And I think all of that contributes to how we also end up in some ways hiding ourselves from ourselves, which is to say, we don't let ourselves see how much we've actually done.
Very much. Another concept that I've seen with immigrants, especially from cultures that are very, very like socially intact, it's been about this concept of a third culture. Like people come in and you're a teen, you're a young adult, you're going into the world of another culture, and you're kind of getting involved in that culture, and that culture possibly the language, the values, the system of communication is different. And then we come back home and we turn into the old culture. So we keep going. A part of us goes into this other culture out there. And then, as the minute we turn in and come into home, we turn into exactly to this language, to this way of behavior. And, it's almost becomes a split. And somehow we have to integrate that split back in ourselves as we're growing, creating our identity. And some people who are the children of the immigrants, even the immigrants themselves, but also the first generation, they feel like they're the third culture where they can't fully belong to the host culture wherever they're living. And they don't fully belong to the traditional family, and they're finding their identity somewhere in the middle. And I think that there's sometimes confusion around like teenagehood and young adulthood, and somewhere between 30s and 40s, this is what I've seen. You share with me what your experience is, that we finally have the ability to integrate this piece together and okay, who am I? And then, obviously they mostly also socialize with a group of people who are within the same, age group and vicinity, and kind of find their own society, which then also kind of blends itself, moves from the traditional sense to the host community and being who they are. What is your experience of this? Or is it even accurate to your experience, what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. This is something I've definitely experienced, and so many people I've spoken to, especially children of immigrants, have felt. So third culture is the sense of, my parents are from one culture. For me, they were from Taiwan. That's a very, Asian identity. And again, that comes with all these different social rules, social norms, expectations, and at the core of it, also values, right? Like these are the things that we hold true to value. This is what we're most important to us. And then you come to North America for me, and you go to school and you're like, oh, wow, there's this entire other world. And this is where I think a lot of kids, they come back and they hear their parents say, oh, you've become too Americanized, you've become too Westernized, because they now have this new space where they're trying to belong. And for kids who grew up in that environment, it's tough because you're trying to be good for your parents, but you're also trying to figure out who you are. And for me, I turned into a bit of a chameleon, which is to say, the only way I knew how to belong to both was just kind of code switch, right? So I would go to my Asian friends and I would learn to adapt to what they like, talk about the music, the singers, the celebrities that they understand. And I would even find myself picking up a little bit more of an accent when I'm talking to them. And then I would go talk to my white friends. And I have a whole other almost persona that shows up. They're both me, but they're also both a little performative. I love the word that you use, which is integration, because I think that's really the core of it. Because for many of us, the result is you don't really feel like you belong in either place. I don't really, for a long time, I didn't really feel like I was truly Westernized because I was still seen. I can't change the fact that I look Asian, and people would make little comments like, oh, like you're Asian, you must like this, or you probably do this, or oh, I love Asian food. And you're kind of like, okay, yes, but I'm also a person. I'm also, I'm also all the same things you are. I'm also a Vancouverite. I'm also, a Canadian, whatever that is. And then I would go back to my hometown in Taipei, and I would walk on the street, and I literally would get strangers coming up to me and being like, hey, are you from America? And I would always ask, like, how do you know? And they're like, oh, you guys just walk different. You guys talk differently. Like the way you hold yourself is different. And what that is it's simultaneously interesting, but you also realize that the core of that is you just don't feel like you really belong anywhere. And that was a hard thing because if you don't belong in either place, then where do you belong? And even the idea of being Asian American or Asian Canadian or Asian diaspora or any kind of immigrant diaspora, I think is so key because you realize there is a third cultural identity. Like I love bubble tea, the drink bubble tea, because I think that it's such a great reflection of this. When I go to China, I don't see people drinking bubble tea, but it's such an identity that we cluster around. And really, yeah, for me, it was exactly as you said. It wasn't until I got in my 30s that I went, oh, okay, I don't have to keep trying to fit into either identity or either persona. I could just integrate and accept that they're all part of me. I'm just multifaceted that way.
That's truly my experience also. Everything you just said, I started smiling because I did go, I've gone when my mom was alive. I did go a couple of times, to Tehran, Iran, and it was interesting because I was so foreign to money and talking and conversation with people, and I would go in and out of like the old times of when I was a child because I was 12 when I moved here, and I would experience that with the family, but it felt like I'm not sure when I belong here. But the same thing, like people would see me and they say exactly like you're not from here, like you come from someplace else. And that was interesting, but I think also because I think I was expecting to belong. And then when it didn't, I was different. It was more of a surprise. The other surprise, John, for me was that I obviously have a lot of friends who are Asian from different countries and my clients and my students. But I never felt like I'm going to belong. I just felt I have an understanding. We share something as a human being, and we have an understanding. The biggest surprise was when I went into Hong Kong a couple of times. It was like if the fly came in and we went with the cab to like the hotels in the city, and I'm like, I belong. It was the oddest experience, John, that it was like pleasantly surprising, very pleasantly surprising. And I was just like, yeah. And everybody was there. It's like, yeah, I belong. And when I even came back, I was like, I was telling my husband, I'm like, oh, I miss Hong Kong. I don't know if I was there. I know if anybody believes in past lives or whatever it was, but it was a very different experience where I like, oh, I go back to Tehran and I don't experience that sudden belonging. And I go to Hong Kong and I have that experience. So it's interesting about the essence of belonging, where
Huge.
I don't expect it, and then suddenly it shows up in some place that I
That's
expected. It's
fascinating.
not, isn't it?
Why Hong Kong?
I
It was just,
tell you, but it was more of I think partially is also Hong Kong is a melting pot, like you see,
it is, yeah.
different
Very multicultural.
yes, from very intercultural, so you see everyone there. Um, but it was more like the differences. It this concept of a uniqueness where we accept that we're all unique and yet
Hmm.
somehow we're all coming together, and possibly that's how Hong Kong is set up, because it's
Mm,
a hub of business where everybody feels like we're all here, we're all different, and then yet connect in so many different layers. So maybe it's the context of that kind of a business environment that just pulls everybody in. I don't know, I can't really tell you you
mhm.
know cognitively, because it's such a visceral experience that
Yes.
you could explain it cognitively any way you want, but
Hmm.
it was just very different. So I just wanted to share that with you because we're talking about belonging, and I said I do have your own experience from that way, but
Yeah.
the other side of it was also interesting to see. So
I
in
love this.
we want to be able to kind of wrap up. There are a couple of things in your book that are, I just want to make sure that we talk about it, because you
Mhm.
include in your book that some of the adaptive patterns that you've
Mhm.
seen as you've worked with people is that they either
Mhm.
become an achiever or a fixer or a chameleon or
Mhm.
a charmer. And so what is the advantage of obviously creating this adaptive pattern? Or
Mhm.
the purpose of it is adaptive, but what are some benefits of it? And then what are some of the downfalls of finding ourselves in these type of adaptive patterns, and what kind of adaptive patterns do you see, or type of integration, or what we do is sometimes we assimilate, but sometimes we just acculturate. We don't assimilate
Mm.
completely. And I think most people I've met mostly now, they acculturate because especially Asians have, wherever they go, they find their own hub, they find their
Mhm.
group. And I think
Mhm.
most people do. I know the Iranians do this. So people come in and then find their own group and kind of hold. So they do acculturate with the host country, but not necessarily assimilate unless they go somewhere which is no one. So they kind of like have to assimilate.
Mhm.
So, based on some of these adaptive patterns that you also mention in your book, benefits,
Mhm.
not so much of a benefit, and what do you suggest in having the ability to come in and break the barriers, as you say in your book, and really become the leader and, go towards your success as someone who can enjoy who you are and where you are and all together?
Hmm. That's a great question. So the seven patterns that we talk about, which includes things like the achiever, which is like overachievement being the main focus, the fixer, which is like I often feel like the need to make sure everyone around me is taken care of. There's a little bit of caretaking, people pleasing that can happen, where I'm self-sacrificing and making sure everyone else around is taken care of because I need to be needed. There's also the chameleon, which is very similar to what we just talked about, this code switching that happens. I could fit in anywhere. Or the charmer, which is I know how to put on a smile and be charismatic and be more likable. So they're all, when you look at it on the surface, great things. These are all ways that we've learned to belong. And it sometimes starts as early as childhood. And that, okay, for me, for example, I learned to self-silence. I learned that if there was conflict in my family, my best way is to get out of the way, be invisible, kind of sit by and, listen and not speak up too much and just listen. So that's a skill essentially in that time. The only question is when these adaptive patterns start following us in our adulthood, the question becomes, is this still helpful? is people pleasing and making sure that I'm not setting boundaries, so I'm always available for everyone else, is that helpful now to get what we needed, or is it actually causing us to get a burnout? Is the belief that I have to always achieve the next big thing and not, worry about all the other things in my life, like my passions or joys or anything like that, are considered? Is that still helpful? Is that actually getting me to where I want to go? So I think the answer to looking at these is that none of these are good nor bad. They just are patterns we learned to adapt to our environment. And that may have helped, especially early stages when in our family, maybe we had a parent who was a little bit more strict. So we learned to put on more of that achiever side. Maybe we went to a school where there's not a lot of people that look like us. So we learned to be the chameleon to better fit in. But now that we're adults, is that still necessary? Or do we learn to love that part that was there to protect us and reintegrate it to our true self, where we could truly show up? Because now belonging might be easier for us to gain, whereas before it required those patterns for entrance.
This also brings me to the conversation of mixed marriages.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Tell me more. Let's dive in.
Again, I work a lot with people who are coming in, wanting to create an amazing marital, let's say, commitments together, where they deal with many of these cultural shifts and changes, whether it's a religious differences or whether it's cultural differences, whether it's getting to know the other culture, and then fitting into the extended family, fitting in with the mother-in-law and father-in-law and sister and brother-in-laws of each side. And, coming so you could definitely also see this kind of third culture where within the unit, they can have their own negotiations and all of that. But then this unit, goes Saturday to one family, and now they have to be another way, and then they go to another family, and bringing all of these families together. It's a challenge. It's a challenge that people are taking great strides in doing, because when you live in other areas that is, again, multicultural and melting pot, you get to, and you go to school with people from different cultures, you get to have friendships and, loving relationships and romantic relationships with not just your culture and others. Sometimes there is, a bias within the culture to say, no, we want you to marry the same culture because we all have the same language, we have the same understanding and all of it. But more and more, that's not happening. So then there's also this, the conflict that gets created, and that the couple have to move beyond. And then it's like, how do you raise the child, and, which culture you kind of like blend in and take into what are your experiences of that?
Oof. I'm in my wife is white and she lives with me. So this is something that we talked about a lot. There's this understanding that, yes, a lot of Asian cultures, parents are maybe hesitant to see their kids marry someone from a different race. And it's less about race and more to do with culture, because it is understanding. Do you understand what it means to be in a collectivist family? Do you understand the roles of hierarchy when we're with our friends? Do you understand how to communicate in a way that's fitting? And if you're from an individualist family, this could sound very, very almost foreign, which technically it is, because you're from an individualist family. You're kind of like, the person you marry is just the person you marry. You start a family together, and that's your family. But in a collectivist culture, you are merging families. You are bringing entire families together, and that's a big part of it. So those roles really have to be clear. There's a film called Crazy Rich Asians that was a huge hit. I don't know if you've seen it or heard of it. And it was talking exactly about this. In the movie, Michelle Yeoh, who is one of my favorite actresses, was talking to the main character. and was discussing this. It's that it's not that we don't want to. Michelle Yeoh is the mother, sort of the matriarch of the Singaporean family, of the main love interest. And, talking to the main character and kind of saying, well, look, it's not that we don't want to have you in here. We see how much you love my son. We see the love that's there. But do you know how to play the role that you're supposed to play? Because the family role is so big. These are tough conversations. And I think that in the end of the day, every family is different. Every relationship is different. I personally think that if you find someone who loves you for who you are, it is worth the work to connect and communicate and to make sure that everyone's needs are being heard. But at the end of the day, you have to be the person to kind of hold your ground and say, look, this is going to be different. Our relationships might change a little bit, and that might be a better thing in the long run.
Yes, absolutely. I work a lot with mixed families and how to accept each other and how to accept what's going on within yeah. But ultimately, what I say is, even if you married, your second cousin from exactly the same neighborhood, trust me, you've got to get to know them and
yes,
family is. So if you could just take the same concept and just be interested and, accommodate, then, it will be okay. I know our time is running low, but I really want to ask you this question. And I don't know if this has happened in Canada, but it certainly happened in US, where I witnessed it, where right around COVID and around COVID and after COVID, there was a high level of racism and bigotry and conversations that I started hearing in public, and I was shocked. I was shocked. And, sometimes people would say it, in their own, I think everybody in one way or another, if they're true to themselves, they have some, biases but, if they can actually hold their mouth and be courteous and really get to know who they are and, come with compassion. But for some reason, right after that time, because, people were saying that it had to do with China, that you were getting angry, rageful, outward, biases and really abuse. What do you suggest when people experience this in how to take care of themselves and how to, defend or be out there and not hide again?
That was a tough time. I remember that time very well. I even, myself, I've had people at the time on the street come up to me, call me slurs, spit on me. I had friends who were, I had a friend who was followed. She was Korean. She was on the subway. She was followed by somebody who kept throwing racial slurs at her. We also saw in the video our, Asian elderly people, grandfathers, grandmothers getting attacked. It was shocking. But what we also saw really was that there was always this otherness that was there. And I think what happened during COVID wasn't that it created the racism. I think what it did was that it showed it. It was there, it was present, it was subtle, it was quiet. And all of a sudden, where the pressure was there, it showed up. I think this is, speaking of big Asian energy, why it is that it's so important for us to speak up for ourselves, is speak up for one another. We have community. This is such a big thing that if somebody is challenging that and it's bringing that safety, either if it's physical safety or psychological safety, we need to stand our ground, speak for ourselves, and realize that every time we do, we are also speaking for those who follow us, those who are around us, those who cannot, those grandparents that we may know who cannot speak for themselves. It is tough to face, but those are the times I think that we need to be in our bigger, more assertive selves and say, nope, enough is enough. We're not going to put up with that.
I know that the contribution that every culture and every race brings to this kind of the multicultural places that we are. Every culture, every person contributes to the beauty of that, and if we know
Mhm.
the value of our contribution wherever we come from, and that however we bring that culture into this kind of a melting pot, then I think absolutely it's a
Yeah.
take a stand,
Yeah.
share the value from from who we are. Okay, big Asian energy. Everybody go get this. And you don't have to be Asian to get this. Of course, I think it's
No.
wonderful if you're Asian to get this, but for anyone who is a first generation, second generation immigrant, this really fits. These conversations that we're having and what's going to be in this book for you, it really, really helps you. And if you also are, have friends, have worked with someone who is Asian, you want to marry someone who's Asian, I really suggest for you to get to know. So Big Asian Energy, an unapologetic guide for breaking barriers to leadership and success by John Wang. John, in 1 minute, anything we haven't said that you really want people to know?
Nothing in terms of a new idea. Really, it comes back down to this is no matter who you are, and this is the essence of the book, it's doing the inner work, do the work. It's not always easily done, but what comes at the other end of it is finding your true authentic self, and it is the greatest gift that you can offer to the world around you.
And where can people find you?
You can find my website at bigasianenergy.com. You can find me on Instagram at John Wang Official, or on TikTok at John Wang Bay, BAE, standing for Big Asian Energy. And of course, the book anywhere you buy books, Amazon, Google, wherever it is you find it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you for hosting such an incredible show. It was an absolute joy.
Beautiful. And for all of you who are out there, create an amazing life for yourself and everyone around you. Until next week, bye-bye.
Break free from the forces holding you back. Get the life you deserve. Eliminate stress, reduce anxiety, decrease depression, and start living your full potential. Thousands have used Dr. Foojan Zaine's awareness integration theory, an evidence-based behavioral health breakthrough with incredible life-changing results. Getting rid of past trauma, having fulfilling relationships, increasing earnings, and living their best life. Now, the Foojan app is available to everyone. The app is Dr. Foojan Zaine's awareness integration theory in the palm of your hand. Download the Foojan app today.
Are you a psychotherapist looking to enhance your practice? The Awareness Integration Therapy developed by Dr. Foojan Zeine is a comprehensive guide to the principle and techniques of this powerful therapeutic approach. Join the growing community who have elevated their practice and expanded their skills by embracing Awareness Integration Therapy and witnessing its life-changing impact. Order your copy on Amazon now.